Morghan paused on her return to Hawthorne House at the well on the house's grounds and stood staring into it. The water level was high on this one, flush with the lawn, particularly after rain such as they'd had the day before. The water reflected the sky and Morghan's face overlooking it. She got on her knees and leant over the water again, then almost jerked back, thinking of the story she'd learnt sometime during her school years, that of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. Morghan shook her head and watched as the hair on her reflection rippled. The story was a warning against self-absorption, and she wasn't self-absorbed, was she? Morghan bent her head for a minute, thinking about it. She hoped she wasn't self-absorbed. She was, she decided, absolutely absorbed in what was happening to her, in the way the world really was, in the beauty and depth and breadth of it. But there was a purpose to all that, wasn't there? She was learning all of this for a purpose. To become the next Lady of the Grove. She shivered at the thought. It wasn't an idea she spent much time on, for she could never imagine Selina not being in that position. An inkling of thought itched at her, an almost physical sensation, and she searched about for it, teasing it into the light, frowning as she did so, unaware of herself as she knelt on the damp grass beside the well. Purpose, Morghan thought. It had something to do with purpose. She lifted her head and looked into the well again, down into the darkness beneath the surface, past the reflection of her face. What had her travelling just before been trying to show her? Morghan's reflected face frowned. There, in the upper realm, the wells were in shining temples, and although the people sitting on the bench beside it had looked relaxed, chatting among themselves, Morghan thought they were there for a particular reason, and not just because it was a lovely place to sit and gossip for a while. She thought they were there for the well. But that was a silly thought, wasn't it? Morghan stretched out, squirming onto her stomach, and touched the water of the well with the flat palm of one hand. The water was cold, and she gasped, then plunged her hand under the water's skin, feeling its wet clasp and thinking furiously. So far, she had seen a fountain and a well. 4 wells, if she counted them all. This one right in front of her. She withdrew her hand and touched the wet fingers to her cheeks. The one at Ash Cottage, the water of which was used to grow the flourishing plants in Teresa's garden. Then there was the small, obviously sacred wellspring at Orchard Cottage, and the well in the upper realm. Could she really include the wells here on Wilde Grove land with those in the other world? Morghan rolled over onto her back and stared up at the sky, her mouth curving as she thought of the wren that had appeared so suddenly on the air currents and then lifted her up into the clouds. Morghan felt the bird was a she, had brought her back down as well, lifting her just as effortlessly as though in the other world Morghan weighed nothing. Snake had been there waiting for them, and when Morghan had turned, eyes shining with the adventure, to thank the bird, Wren had sat on her outstretched arm, looking back at her unblinking, and Morghan had felt a rush of love for the bird. Wren, she thought now, knowing the bird was another of her kin, just as Crane was Selina's and Cormorant was Anwin's. She wondered if everyone had bird kin, then decided she was getting off track and rubbed at her face. These travellings were a puzzle, she thought, like trying to figure out what dreams were about. They never seemed to make sense until she found the piece that unlocked them. So, if it was like dreaming then, that might mean that the wells and fountain were symbolic. Did that work? Morghan squinted up at the sky, thinking furiously. The well was obviously important. To build a shining marble temple about it, that meant something, she was sure.